What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going over some tips to hopefully help you play better in close range fights. I've made videos like this in the past, but it's been several seasons since I've done so, and I think this is the most important part of the game. If you're trying to improve in Fortnite, whether it's build or zero build, getting good in close range fights is very important because a lot of fights often come down to close range fights. Especially the ones that determine the outcome of the game. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you like to see more, and comment down below what area of the game you think you're best at and what area of the game you think you're weakest in. And let's get right into it. The first thing I'm going to talk about is just going to be to take advantage of cover and right shoulder peeks. Like, there's going to be times in this game where, you know, you're in a close range fight with an opponent and y'all are just kind of out in the open trading damage. That will definitely happen, but you don't want that to be the norm, and you don't want to go into every fight just thinking it's going to be a 50-50 damage trade. And the way you play around cover, and especially like inside of buildings, but even if you're out in the open like a tree or a rock, whatever, the way you play around these pieces of cover can give you a huge advantage in these close range fights. And right shoulder peeks and taking advantage of them is imperative for this, because the way the camera is in Fortnite, if you peek from the right side of a piece of cover, you have to expose less of your character than if you peek from the left. So if you're consistently peeking from the left, you're giving your own opponent like a huge advantage in that fight. You want to be peeking from the right, or you want to be peeking from the right as often as possible, not from the left. Again, there'll be times where maybe you have to peek from the left, but more often than not, you're going to want to be peeking from the right. And anytime you're playing around any piece of cover or inside of a building, you want to be taking advantage of right shoulder peeks. If I could give one tip to every Fortnite player that I think would have like the largest impact on their game, it would be to take advantage of right shoulder peeks as often as possible. This is when you're using natural cover, when you're inside a house, if you're playing off a porta bunker or ice wall, or even if you're playing in build mode. A lot of like build fighting and box fighting is about getting that right shoulder peek advantage. This is very important in game. Another thing that's very important in close range fights is going to be your movement. A lot of this can boil down to just getting right shoulder peeks as often as possible, like I said, but also things like jump shotting, crouching, crouch spamming, just anything you can do to throw off your opponent's aim. And one of the easiest pieces of advice I can give for this is just like when you fight somebody that was hard to hit or that's like very slippery or tricky to fight, maybe go back into replay mode, watch what they did, and then try to emulate that into your own gameplay. If you were fighting somebody and they just kind of stood there and let you kill them, that'd be super easy, right? You want to be annoying to fight. You want to be annoying for your opponents to try to damage, and movement can be a huge aspect of that. Like I said, jump shotting, crouch spamming when using spray weapons. There's lots of different times where you're going to want to do these things. I will have a video linked down in the description below where I talk about movement more in depth and have like more examples. Just hard to get into all of that in this video. That's more of like a broad overview without this video being like 20 minutes long, you know? But just anything you can do to throw off your opponent's aim is huge. One very important aspect is going to be when you're pushing somebody who's behind cover. Oftentimes, like jumping into a slide and getting a wide peek can be much better than just running around that piece of cover. And this is very important as well if you are in a situation where you do have to peek from the left. Jumping into a slide to do so is probably going to be better than just like slowly walking up. But again, like I said, I'll have a video down in the description below that talks more about this. But if you haven't ever really thought about your movement at all in game, and a lot of newer players just kind of stand there and like they struggle to move their character and aim at the same time, getting used to that movement and using movement to your advantage in fights can be huge. And you can also use movement to aim, because like when you jump, it moves your crosshair. When you strafe side to side, it moves your crosshair, and that does make it a little bit easier to kind of aim in some fights. If you aim by strafing your character, that's huge in a lot of shooters that pretty much every shooter I've ever played, strafe aiming is pretty helpful. Another thing is going to be the way you swap to your spray weapon, because if you're going to be using a shotgun and a spray weapon combo, like the Sharptooth and Combat SMG this season, doing so properly is very important, because it takes time to swap weapons, and then also like obviously it takes time to eliminate your opponent. So let's say you have an opponent at 250 HP in zero build, you haven't done a thing to them, you end up missing your shotgun shot, and then you swap to your SMG. I think a lot of players in this situation would just stay on their SMG for the remainder of the fight since they already shot their shotgun. But if you missed your shotgun shot and they hit theirs, you're probably already going to be at like a huge damage deficit. So just relying on the SMG isn't going to get the job done. You're probably going to want to spray your SMG for a little bit until your shotgun's ready to shoot again. or spray the SMG until you think the person is weak enough to where you can eliminate them in one pump shot. But just sticking on the SMG after you miss that first pump shot, or after you maybe hit a subpar shot, oftentimes isn't going to be ideal. Can be kind of weird this season because the combat SMG is very, very good, so you can melt people super fast. But just as a general rule, if the person is very weak, then sure, you can finish them with the SMG. If they're still pretty healthy, you probably just want to use your SMG until your shotgun is ready to shoot again, and then swap back to the shotgun, pump them. Maybe that will kill them, or swap back to the SMG afterwards. But a lot of times you'll just be using your spray weapon to kind of fill the void between pump shots, because like the pump takes a decent amount of time to shoot. If you're in a situation where, let's say you hit them for 160 with your shotgun, at that point they only have 90 HP, so it might be ideal just to like swap to your combat SMG and stay on it till they're dead, because it will only take a few bullets. But a lot of this boils down to like the opponent's HP and how long it will take to kill them. The time that you're sitting there on an SMG, you have to be exposed to do damage, whereas like with the shotguns, one of the things that's made them dominant in close range fights in Fortnite is you can peek for a very limited amount of time, throw out a shot, and then go back into cover. You don't have to be exposed the entire time you're dealing damage, whereas with the SMG you do. So swapping properly in those fights can be a huge difference maker. Another thing that can make a huge difference in your fight is having a sensitivity that feels comfortable to hip fire with. This is imperative for close range fights, because often with your shotgun in close range, you're going to want to hip fire as often as possible. One trend that I've really noticed with players that are newer to the game or aren't as experienced, whether it be, you know, watching streams or, you know, when I do the spectating videos, a lot of players that aren't as comfortable fighting in close range fights, they have to aim down sights with their shotgun in every fight. And there are times where you might want to aim your shotgun because it does tighten the pellet spread. But if you're always aiming in, this lowers your sensitivity, and this makes it to where if your opponent does anything with movement, it's going to be really likely to throw your aim off because you can't react as well. And then also if you're playing on controller, the hip fire aim assist with shotguns is better than when you aim in. So it makes you less reactive. And I talked about how important movement is in close range fights. So if you're always aiming in with your shotgun, that's not ideal. Again, this just comes down a lot to players who I think aren't as comfortable fighting or aren't as comfortable with their sensitivity. So having a sensitivity that you feel comfortable hip firing with is super important. I think that's just huge for close range fights. And then I think a lot of players often just don't even think about this either. They just like used to aiming in before they shoot. But getting comfortable hip firing is very important for close range fights and very important for shotgun fights. I said there's times where you want to aim, and typically the times where I will aim my shotgun is going to be if the opponent isn't fighting back. So like if I'm on Loot Island and they're rifting onto me but they're within range to be shotgunned, then I might aim there. If I'm coming up behind someone who doesn't know where I am, I might aim there. If I'm playing a right shoulder peek and sliding out, that's a situation where I might aim in. If it's a little bit more of like a ranged fight, the sharp tooth can kind of do that. I might aim in those situations. But the times you aim are like the exception, not the rule with shotguns. The hip firing is what you're going to be wanting to do in close range fights because it makes it better for you to react to enemy movement, and also makes it to where you can do more with your movement. If you're aimed in, you're not going to be strafing as fast. You're not going to be able to jump, and things like that can be huge in those close range fights, like I said. Another thing that just makes a lot of your fights easier to win, and I've talked about this in countless videos, is going to be getting opening tags as far as like before you get into a close range fight, getting that opponent weak, because close range fights can swing very fast with how hard the shotguns can hit and how fast the combat SMG can melt people. This varies from season to season, but like in Chapter 4 Season 2, we had the Mythic Havoc pump that could hit for 250. So anytime you got close to someone, they might just be able to delete you from the game. And if you're able to open that close range fight with medium range shots, not only do you put the opponent on a back foot, you maybe force them to heal, or, you know, they're weaker anyways, this is going to make it faster for you to kill them and less likely you take more damage. You want to be in these close range fights for as little time as possible because they're the most dangerous fights in the game. And that's why I said they're often going to be the ones that decide the outcome of the game, not only because the zone is smaller in game, but also the situations that really matter are going to be those close range fights. If you're in a medium to long range fight, you often can get out of it a bit easier. You know, it's not as urgent, but close range fights are very urgent. And one of the easiest ways you can win them is just to win them quickly by getting decent damage to start the fight with your AR, your DMR, or sniper, and then pushing in with a mobility item like shockwaves to finish the kill. You don't want to just be hopping on people with no early damage unless you absolutely have to. like I've talked about it several times in this video, there's going to be times where things are not ideal in Fortnite and you got to do something that isn't preferred, but every fight just shouldn't be you like 50-50ing someone who's full HP and just like jumping on them with a shotgun. It can work, but it's not ideal, and things can go south really quick in close range fights. So starting your fight with AR tags, putting the opponent on the back foot makes it much easier to get that kill. And then the final thing I'm going to talk about, or one of the final things I'm going to talk about, is just going to be to practice in creative. I'll have some map codes down in the description below. Everything I talked about in this video kind of just comes down to muscle memory and practice, like knowing how to play off cover well, you know, using your movement properly in fights, being comfortable hip firing, getting that timing down when you're swapping to a spray weapon. All of that, a lot of it just comes down to being comfortable with the mechanics of the game, being comfortable fighting, and having that muscle memory, like timing down. And BR is a very bad way to build that, because you spend, you know, the early parts of a game looting, and then a lot of players kind of play slower mid to late game because they've already invested that time in the match and they want to win. It's just not a great place to start like practicing fighting. And then you also bring into account that a lot of people are going to be nervous fighting because they really want to get that win, or they aren't as comfortable fighting, and that's also going to throw everything I just talked about off. Whereas if you play some of the creative maps that I recommend, you can get into a lot of fights in a very short time span. In 10-15 minutes, you can get in like 20, 30, 40 engagements, and that's equivalent to probably like a few hours of playing BR, depending on how many fights you get in a game. So you can get a lot better, a lot faster in creative. There's less of a penalty for dying, and there's less downtime between fights, so you can just get in fight after fight after fight, build that muscle memory. When I've talked about these maps in the past, people have kind of complained about how random they can be, like they're just like getting third-partied or killed or whatever. It doesn't matter. You're not really playing these maps to win the team deathmatch or win the free-for-all. You just want to get practice fighting, and creative is the best way to do that. Like I talked about with right shoulder peaks, if I could tell every Fortnite player one thing to hopefully improve their game, it would be that. Practicing in creative would also be up there. I think a lot of players kind of stagnate in skill just in BR because time... It's not efficient as far as fighting goes, how much time it takes to, like, you know, loot up and find people and all that. Creative will advance your improvement in game much faster. And then the final thing we're going to talk about is going to be the loot pool. This is something I would normally talk about earlier on in the video, but I'm making this kind of midway through the season, so I feel like everyone's kind of experienced with the guns at this point in the game. And then also there's not really any clear dominant shotgun. I feel like the shotgun balance is pretty good this season. I feel like you can use any one you want. The heisted exotic Maven is, you know, probably the outlier there. It's pretty overpowered. It's pretty insane. But you have to find this in lock boxes or buy it from the NPC. But as far as like the general loot pool goes, you know, the Sharptooth, the Infiltrator, the Maven, I think they all have their pros and cons, and it really depends on your playstyle. If you like to just get in people's face and you don't want to worry about weapon swapping or anything like that, the Maven auto shotgun is going to be ideal. If you like, you know, hitting those hard shots, the pump is probably going to be ideal, but you probably need a spray weapon to combo with that. You're going to need to play off cover a lot better and play a lot smarter with a pump shotgun than you would with the Maven. But the reward for doing so is really nice, because once you get that playstyle down, it's much more of like, I feel like it's less random of a playstyle than using the Maven. The exotic Maven, again, is an outlier. That gun is insane. You can just 50-50 people with it a lot, and it'll just kill people. And then the Infiltrator is kind of like a nice middle ground between a pump and a Maven, where it is a higher fire rate shotgun, but it's not so high of a fire rate. And then it also has really good range and pellet spread. So I feel like all the shotguns this season are pretty solid. And that's another reason why I kind of saved this topic for last, because I think a lot just comes down to personal preference, your playstyle, and what you enjoy using. My favorite is probably the Sharptooth, and then if I get the exotic Maven, obviously I'll use that. But if someone tells me they like the Infiltrator, they like the Maven, I don't really think there's anything wrong with that. It's just a lot of preference. But that is going to be it for this video. I hope you guys found this helpful, informative, interesting. If you did, remember to give it a like. Subscribe if you like to see more. Also, one thing I forgot to talk about is with the creative practice, this also makes it much easier for you to fine-tune your sensitivity, because you can get into a lot of fights quickly. You know, if your sensitivity feels too fast, you can turn it down a bit and adjust to that. Or if it feels too slow, you can turn it up a bit, and vice versa. Whereas BR, there's so much downtime in fights that it's also not a good avenue for adjusting to those new settings. But that is it for this. Give it a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you'd like to see more. The video about movement and the map codes will be linked down in the description below. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.